The moment Marcus circled my name on the screen and called me outdated, 40 people stared at the table while my entire career was stripped from me in seconds. I sat there listening to him erase decades of work, as if I were some dusty relic he could sweep aside. He thought he understood my worth. He had no idea what I still held in my hands or how much power he'd just pushed awake. Stay with me, and if this story hits something in you, subscribe and tell me in the comments when someone underestimated you too. Marcus stood at the front of the room with the kind of confidence only a man who'd never been told no in his life could possess. He clicked to the next slide, and my name appeared in bold red letters, circled twice as if I were a problem on a test he planned to erase. "This," he announced, "is where we've been falling behind." 40 sets of eyes dropped instantly, everyone pretending to analyze their notes, their tablets, their shoes, anything but my face. I felt the heat rise up my neck as he continued, explaining how my investigative approach was inefficient, dated, and no longer aligned with the company's future. He said the words like he was reading off a grocery list, casual, dismissive, as though I hadn't spent more than half my life building the foundation he currently stood on. I kept waiting for someone, anyone to interrupt. Just one voice willing to say, "That's not true. She's the reason we're even here today." Instead, silence swallowed the room whole. The long conference table stretched in front of me like a courtroom bench, and I felt like a defendant waiting for a verdict that had already been decided. Marcus flipped to a slide showing his new workflow model, all shiny graphics and buzzwords. No one seemed to notice that not a single person on his chart had real field experience. "Going forward, Chao," he said, "our predictive modeling teams will handle all investigations. Fast, clean, standardized." He spoke like he was offering the company a gift, not dismantling decades of skilled work. My chest tightened, and for a moment I swear the room tilted. I tried to swallow the humiliation gathering like sand in my throat. I had worked storms, disasters, industrial collapses, cases that required intuition, grit, scars. And now a man who'd never spent a day on the ground was telling me I was obsolete. "Alina's current caseload will be reassigned effective immediately," he continued. "She'll transition to archival duties until her contract concludes." It took a second for the words to make sense, and when they finally did, my fingers dug into the armrests until the leather creaked. Archival duties. After 27 years, they were turning me into a filing clerk. Not one person protested. Some wouldn't even look at me. Others shifted in their seats like they hoped the floor would swallow them before I noticed their cowardice. I scanned the room, recognizing every face. People I'd trained, fought for, recommended for promotions. People who'd once treated me like the backbone of this place, all of them pretending they didn't hear a thing. Marcus clicked off the projector with a self-satisfied smile. "Any questions?" he asked. No one spoke, not even me. The meeting dissolved quickly after that. Chairs scraped, laptops closed, footsteps scattered toward the hallway like a herd escaping a fire. But the flames were right where I sat, contained only by whatever thin piece of composure I had left. As the room emptied, Marcus passed behind me and murmured just loud enough for me to hear. "Nothing personal, just progress." I kept my face still, staring straight ahead at the blank screen. He thought he'd ended something that day. What he didn't realize was that humiliation, when it cuts deep enough, doesn't kill you. It sharpens you. And the moment he called me obsolete, something inside me, something he should have feared, finally woke up. When I stepped out of that conference room, the hallway felt colder than it ever had, as if the building itself had already begun rewriting its memory of me. People who used to wave, stop by my office, or ask for advice suddenly became fascinated by anything that wasn't me. The floor, a non-existent smudge on the wall, their phones held a little too high to be believable. I walked slowly, not because I was unsure where to go, but because I needed those extra seconds to keep myself from unraveling right there in the open. 27 years reduced to a meeting that didn't even last an hour. My office sat at the end of the West Wing, a corner I'd earned through years of brutal casework and long nights. The nameplate on my door still read, Senior Investigation Specialist. but now it felt like a lie someone had forgotten to remove. Inside, the lights buzzed softly, the same way they always had, but the place didn't feel like mine anymore. My desk, once covered in active case files and field notes, now looked too neat, too organized, like someone preparing a space for the next person who'd sit there. I didn't have long to absorb the shift before a sharp knock hit the doorframe. Kira stood there, Marcus's assistant, 20-something, polished, and eager to prove she belonged in his orbit. She didn't even try to mask the impatience in her voice. "I need access to your case directories," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Marcus needs everything transferred for reassignment by end of day." I stared at her, unsure whether she understood the magnitude of what she was asking or simply didn't care. "Those files aren't just digital folders," I said. "They're years of field data, handwritten notes, contextual observations. They're not something you can just drag and drop." She gave a small shrug, tapping her pen against the folder in her hands. "I just need the passwords." That was it. No acknowledgement of the work. No hesitation, no curiosity. I'd spent years in steel plants, collapsed warehouses, broken communities, places where trust and detail meant everything. And now Kira stood there treating my life's work like an outdated spreadsheet she needed to clear off a server. I handed her the information anyway, because refusing would have only sped up whatever quiet execution Marcus had planned next. As she walked out, she said, "You might want to start clearing out your personal things. HR will reach out with transition steps." Transition, a word that implied control, cooperation, even dignity. This was none of those things. When she left, I closed the door and let the silence press against me. It was heavy, but not crushing, not yet. I sat at my desk, running my fingers across the stack of notebooks to the right, cases that had changed laws, shifted company policies, saved lives. Memories that stretched across decades suddenly felt like artifacts no one cared to preserve. I thought of the people who should have said something in that room, the ones who owed their promotions to the skills I taught them, the ones who once told me I was the person who made them believe they could do this work. Not one had spoken. The betrayal was sharp, but not surprising. People cling to power, even when it isn't theirs. They cling harder when they're afraid, and Marcus had made them very afraid. As the late afternoon sun slid across my desk, catching the edge of my oldest field notebook, something inside me steadied. They thought they were clearing me out. They thought this was the end of the story. But endings and erasures aren't the same thing, and I wasn't going anywhere quietly. That night, sleep didn't just avoid me. It circled the edges of my thoughts like a reminder of everything I'd lost in a single afternoon. I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall, the faint ticking of the thermostat, the quiet sounds of a house I'd barely spent time in over the years because I was always working. My mind replayed every look from that meeting, every averted eye, every stiff shoulder turning away from me as though silence might save them from being the next target. I wasn't angry at them, not really. Anger would have been easier than the slow, heavy realization that I had built loyalty in places where loyalty was never something people planned to return. My chest tightened as memories I hadn't expected surfaced. The nights I stayed late to help new investigators rewrite their reports. The times I stood up for people who'd made mistakes. The weekends I sacrificed when a case needed to be closed by Monday. All the effort I'd poured into protecting this company and its people sat like a weight I couldn't shift. Marcus's voice drifted back to me, sharp and smug. Nothing personal, just progress. There it was again. That word. Progress. As if being pushed aside by someone who'd never held a flashlight at a collapse site was some kind of natural evolution. As if 27 years of experience had a shelf life that expired the second a younger man walked in with glossy charts. Around 3 a.m, I got up and walked to the small room I called my office. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light over the boxes I'd brought home years earlier. Old field journals, early case files, fragments of a long career that had shaped the kind of investigator I'd become. I pulled out a notebook from my second year on the job. The pages were smudged from a factory collapse I'd worked, the ink blurred in places where my gloves had been damp. I turned the pages slowly, absorbing the notes, the names, the details I could still recall even after all these years. Every line was a reminder of why I'd stayed in this field. Not for promotions, not for applause, for impact, for truth, for the work. And for the first time since that meeting, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not humiliation, but clarity. They could strip my title. They could reassign my cases. They could pretend I had become an inconvenience in their shiny new world. But what they couldn't erase was the thing Marcus didn't even recognize as valuable. The deep, instinctive knowledge I'd spent a lifetime building. Experience doesn't vanish just because someone else feels threatened by it. As dawn crept in through the blinds, thin and pale, I realized I wasn't mourning the job. I was mourning the illusion that the place I'd given so much to would ever protect me the way I'd protected it. The decision formed quietly, without ceremony, without dramatic declarations. If they wanted to push me out, I would go, but not emptied, not diminished, and definitely not powerless. I wasn't done yet, not even close. By Monday morning, the company was already showing cracks, though no one would dare say it out loud. Word drifted to me through messages that came in bursts, half-finished sentences from people too scared to be caught talking to someone who'd been marked for removal. The first sign came from a long-standing client whose projects I'd handled for over a decade. Their message was short, almost clipped. The preliminary findings make no sense. Who reviewed this? I didn't respond. I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't even technically an employee anymore, not in the way that mattered. But the knot in my stomach tightened because I knew exactly what had happened. Marcus had rushed the reassignment. His teams were already drowning in work they didn't understand, using methods they weren't trained for. Investigations aren't spreadsheets. They're living things, messy, unpredictable, and full of variables that only experience can interpret. By midweek, the whispers grew louder. A safety audit for a major manufacturing partner, one that required meticulous, cross-verification, had been streamlined using Marcus's new predictive workflow. The result? A glaring oversight so severe the partner threatened to pull their contract entirely. Then came Brielle's call. She didn't bother pretending everything was normal. "Alina," she whispered, "you won't believe what's happening. We submitted the Northside review and they tore it apart. They said the conclusions contradicted their own on-site reports." I closed my eyes, letting her words settle. Northside was one of the most detail-sensitive clients we had. They demanded more from us than anyone else, and they relied heavily on observational notes, the kind only field investigators could capture. I knew immediately why it had failed. "What did Marcus say?" I asked. Brielle hesitated. He blamed the team, said they weren't adapting fast enough, that they were clinging to outdated habits. My jaw tightened. Did anyone push back? Another pause, longer this time. "People are scared. They've seen what happened to you." She didn't have to say more. Fear spreads like mold. Quiet, invisible at first, then everywhere. That same afternoon, Catherine showed up at my house. She looked different. Tired, strained, like someone who'd been holding the company together with unraveling thread. "I shouldn't be here," she said the moment I opened the door, "but you need to know what's going on." We sat at my kitchen table, the place where I'd shared coffee with her countless times, back when we were colleagues instead of casualties of leadership decisions. "The State Review Board rejected the Westfall analysis," she said quietly. "They said the findings were incomplete, inaccurate, sloppy." I raised an eyebrow. "Their words. Verbatim." She rubbed her temples. "And Marcus told the board you'd left behind disorganized notes, that the lack of clarity in your files caused the errors." I let out a short breath, part disbelief, part grim recognition. "He's trying to rewrite the narrative," I said. "He's trying to rewrite you," she corrected, "and people are starting to believe him." There it was, the part I'd been waiting for, the inevitable turn. When people lose control, they don't admit failure. They look for someone to blame, even if that someone no longer works there. "It gets worse," she added. "3 agencies are reviewing our certifications now. The board is panicking." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. It was predictable, I said. And it was. You can't build a structure by tearing out its foundation and hoping no one notices the house shifting. Catherine looked at me for a moment, her expression softening. You know, he's terrified of you. I laughed once, dryly. He shouldn't be scared of me. He should be scared of what he doesn't understand. She shook her head. No, he's scared because you do understand, and because he can't control what you know. After she left, I stood by the window, watching cars drift down the street in the fading light. The collapse had begun, not because of sabotage or resistance, but because leadership had mistaken speed for skill, volume for value, and arrogance for vision. They believed replacing experience with shortcuts made them modern. Instead, it made them vulnerable, and they were about to learn exactly how vulnerable they'd become. When the call came the next morning, I already knew what it meant. Catherine's name flashed on my phone, her voice tight, clipped, carrying that familiar tremor people get when they're stuck between fear and duty. The board wants to see you, she said. 9 a.m., the main conference room. The same room where Marcus had dismantled my career like it was dead weight. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. When institutions panic, they circle back to the people they once discarded, hoping the ones they underestimated might save them after all. I arrived a few minutes early, not to impress anyone, but because I wanted a moment to breathe before stepping back into the same space that had nearly undone me. The door was already cracked open. Inside, the atmosphere was thick, board members murmuring, papers shuffling, tension hanging like fog. Marcus sat to the right of Dr. Rourke, arms crossed, jaw clenched, pretending he wasn't unraveling. His eyes flicked up when I walked in. He looked at me the same way someone looks at a fire they thought they'd extinguished, but now see burning again. I took a seat directly across from him. I wanted him to see my face when everything shifted. Dr. Rourke cleared his throat. Thank you for coming, Alina. There have been serious concerns regarding recent work. That was an understatement, but I stayed silent. Let them talk. Let them squirm. Marcus leaned forward, eager to reclaim control. We've received numerous complaints from clients, he said. Inconsistent findings, missing context, poor quality analysis. He gestured broadly, like he was presenting evidence in a courtroom. We have reason to believe these issues stem from the disorganized state of the case files you left behind. There it was, the attempt to pin the collapse on me. I kept my expression calm, almost bored. Is that the official position? I asked slowly. That I caused the failures after being removed from my role? Marcus stiffened. Your outdated system made the transition difficult. The lack of structured documentation. I cut in before he could finish. Interesting, I said, reaching into my bag. Because according to my original employment contract, those case files and the clients connected to them aren't yours to assign or reinterpret without my explicit consent. The room went silent. Not quiet, silent. I placed the bound stack of contracts onto the table and slid them toward the board. Section 7, paragraph 3, I said. Client relationships built through direct investigative work remain the intellectual property of the investigator unless formally reassigned in writing. Dr. Rourke blinked. Is that accurate? Their legal counsel, who had been quiet until that moment, opened the contract and paled noticeably. It's valid, he said, and binding. Marcus shot to his feet. This is absurd. That contract is from decades ago. And never amended, I replied coolly, which means every long-term client I brought in and every method I developed belongs to me, not the company. A chorus of whispers rippled down the table. Elias Trent, the board chair, leaned forward. Alina, how many clients have contacted you since your departure? 19, I said, representing a little over 60% of your commissioned revenue. Marcus sank back into his chair, color draining from his face. This is outrageous, he muttered. You can't just... I didn't just anything, I said. They came to me because they trusted my work, because your new model couldn't deliver what they needed. The board exchanged frantic glances. A few looked ready to fire Marcus on the spot. I stood, collecting my bag. If you need time to discuss, I'll wait outside. I paused at the door, letting my gaze sweep across the room. But understand this, what you tried to erase was never yours to take. And now that you've seen the consequences, you finally understand the value of what you dismissed. Then I stepped out, leaving Marcus to choke on the truth he never saw coming. 40 minutes passed before they called me back in, but I already knew my answer long before the board finished tearing Marcus apart behind closed doors. Whatever offer they planned to put in front of me, whatever title, division, or apology they thought might lure me back, none of it mattered. I wasn't returning to a place that only valued me once they were drowning. So when they asked if I'd consider leading a specialized investigative unit to stabilize their collapsing client base, I declined without hesitation, not angrily, not vindictively, just decisively. It was the first moment since that disastrous meeting weeks earlier where I felt fully in control of my own story. I went home that afternoon and opened a blank notebook. Clean pages, no old case dust clinging to the corners, no history weighing down the margins. For the first time, I wasn't documenting someone else's expectations. I was building something that belonged solely to me. Within 2 days, I secured a modest office space on the east side of the city, a simple room with sunlight that spilled across the floors every morning. I bought a secondhand desk, a sturdy chair, and hung up the framed photos I'd always kept hidden behind my office door, the ones from old field cases where I still looked young, fierce, stubborn. I needed to see her. Again. Word spread faster than I expected. The first call came from a director I'd worked with for years. He didn't even bother pretending this was formal. "They say you've retired," he said. I knew that was a lie. "Are you taking clients?" By the end of the week, I had more work than I could handle alone. Projects that required real investigative instincts, the kind Marcus's models couldn't simulate no matter how many colorful charts he printed. Clients weren't just returning. They were arriving quietly, one after another, with the same private confession. "We didn't trust them without you." I hired 2 associates, women who reminded me of myself when I first started. Sharp eyes, no fear of difficult truths, hungry to learn. I taught them the things no manual could capture: how to read a room, how to hear the truth sitting between someone's sentences, how to spot the detail that everyone else overlooked because it didn't fit neatly on a checklist. A few months in, Brielle asked if she could join me. I hesitated, not because she wasn't capable, she was one of the best investigators I'd ever trained, but because I remembered her silence during that meeting. I remembered her looking down at her tablet while Marcus cut me apart, but she didn't hide from that. "I failed you," she said plainly. "I know it. I want to earn a second chance." And somehow, maybe because I'd been given second chances before, I agreed. Working in my own space felt nothing like the years I'd spent in the company. There was no weight pressing against my ribs, no subtle fear of being replaced, no voice whispering that my time had passed. Instead, there was clarity, a sense that every report I wrote, every decision I made, every case I accepted was tied to something bigger than a paycheck or a title. It was tied to the part of myself I had nearly let them extinguish. They thought they had taken everything from me when they stripped away my position. They didn't understand that the position was never the source of my power. I was. 6 months after I opened my own practice, the company finally released its statement. Leadership changes amid structural realignment. No names mentioned, but everyone in the industry knew what it meant. Marcus was out. The board had tried to soften the blow, but nothing could hide the fact that their golden visionary had burned the place down in record time. I didn't feel triumph when I read it. What I felt was something closer to completion, as if a long, painful chapter had finally been sealed. Clients kept coming, referrals growing faster than I could track. I wasn't the fastest, and I sure wasn't the cheapest, but people trusted me. They trusted the work. They trusted the years behind my decisions, and that trust, quiet, steady, earned, became the foundation of everything I built. One fall afternoon, as the sun was sliding low behind the ridge, I received a call from Dr. Lillian Hart, who had stepped in as interim director. Her voice carried the tone of someone who had spent weeks cleaning up someone else's wreckage. Alina, she said, I won't insult you by pretending we handled things correctly, but I'd like to propose something different. Not a job, not a title, a partnership. She outlined a model where my practice and the company collaborated only on large, complex investigations, cases requiring both their infrastructure and my expertise. Equal footing, equal say, no folding me back into a system that once tried to erase me. I listened carefully, expecting to feel hesitation or resentment. Instead, I felt calm clarity. I hadn't fought my way out just to go crawling back. But partnership? That was different. Partnership meant I wasn't returning as a subordinate. I was returning as someone whose value had been proven beyond argument. I agreed to a trial collaboration. One case, no strings attached. And it worked better than either of us expected. They handled logistics. My team handled the ground truth. Together, we delivered a final report so thorough that 3 state coalitions signed on for long-term work. For the first time in years, I saw what leadership looked like when it wasn't poisoned by ego. A few weeks later, Brielle stopped by my office and said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd stayed?" I looked at the space around me, the sun-washed walls, the quiet hum of my team working in the next room, the stack of reports waiting for review, and I realized something simple but powerful. If I had stayed, I said, they would have convinced me I didn't matter. Leaving wasn't the ending, it was the beginning. Today, when younger investigators ask how I survived being labeled obsolete, I tell them the truth. Being underestimated was the greatest gift they accidentally gave me. It forced me to remember who I was, and it showed me what I could build when I stopped waiting for permission. There's a part of my story that still sits heavy in my chest, not because of the humiliation itself, but because of what it revealed. I learned that people can praise you for years and still abandon you the moment doing so becomes inconvenient. I learned that loyalty inside a system is often conditional, fragile, and dependent on who holds power that week. And I learned that being called obsolete doesn't define you. Sometimes it frees you. When Marcus dismissed me in front of everyone, I thought I'd lost everything I'd built. What I didn't realize was that I'd simply outgrown a place that no longer understood the value of experience. The truth is, age, wisdom, and hard-earned instinct are assets America doesn't talk about enough. We celebrate the shiny and the new, but some things, judgment, discernment, intuition, cannot be rushed, automated, or replaced. If you've ever been pushed aside for someone younger, cheaper, or more innovative, let my story remind you that worth isn't determined by external labels. Sometimes you don't get justice wrapped in a bow. Sometimes the bad guy doesn't crumble in front of you, but they do face consequences when their arrogance catches up. My revenge wasn't about destroying Marcus. It was about refusing to let him destroy me. And the most surprising lesson? Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. You don't always have to prove your value to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You can choose to walk away and build something better. Your life right now might feel unstable. Maybe you're being overlooked, underestimated, or quietly replaced, but you have more power than you think. You know more than you realize. And you are allowed to start over on your terms. How to get started today. Write down 3 skills you've earned through experience, not training, not titles, but lived work. Reach out to one person who trusted your abilities in the past. Ask yourself honestly, what would I build if I stopped waiting for their validation? If this story resonated with you, comment below, share your own experience, and subscribe so we can walk through these moments together. You're not alone, and your story isn't over.